Welcome back to Spotlight. If you just joined us, I've been having a discussion with Ms. Carolyn Igwe. She's the Deputy Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Social Development, and we're talking about burial grounds, procedures and fees and applications. And the number is going to come up on the screen any moment, so you can give me a text, or you can send me a text, or you can call on the phone. That's 446-1949 is the number to call. And you can ask questions you need to ask. All of us going to come into the situation at one point or the other. Either we're going to be burying someone or someone's going to be burying us. So either way, we need to know the information. So this is a good opportunity to call and find out about those things concerning burial that you may not know, and you may need some clarifications on the things that you think you know. So you can call us at any time. Now, we were just talking about the layout of the graves at the cemetery, and you were saying that the space is a 4x9 space, and we always heard the term 6 feet under. Right. So it's still 6 feet under.
Still 6 feet under.
Still 6 feet deep.
Yes. Except in cases where you can't go 6 feet, like as I mentioned earlier, King Yad and Anegada is also one of those.
Is there a minimum?
I think the law just says 6 feet where, I'm not sure if it says where possible, but it says something to that effect.
Okay.
But you should go. Basically, you're going 6 feet unless you can't go.
Because I imagine that too close to the surface might be a sanitary challenge. I don't know.
Right.
So that's something that perhaps you might need to take a look at.
Okay.
You know, I don't know how rocky surface might be and what other challenges you might meet in the process of digging.
Okay.
So that's something that might you might need to take into account.
Okay.
But as far as what the cemetery looks and the layout of the cemetery, children's graves have a different dimension, yes?
Right. So the adult grave is 9 by 4, sorry, and a child's grave is 6 by 3.
Okay. And you will still have the 3 feet between
yes.
those spaces.
Yeah, and in most cemeteries, not in most, but in some of them in particular, I know that, I think what you'll find in Greenland, and I know in Johnson Gut, that the children's grave would be the ones that are closest probably to the entrance in a separate section.
Now, for other different burial I don't know, procedures, well, in the case of, let me just be specific, in the case of cremation or burial at sea or scattering remains over sea or land, are there any regulations governing those types of situations?
Burial at sea, we do process those as well, but I know there are some specifications that this funeral home must adhere to in terms of preparation of the body and the casket. So the funeral home is aware of those. And we have the scattering of ashes. We do process quite a number of them. I've seen we've had a reduction in them probably in recent times, but there are times where we do have a number of those applications because a number of persons visit the territory and they leave in their will that they must be scattered in the waters of the territory. So we do process a number of applications like that. And the current practice is we would usually tell them 5 miles south of Norman Island or Peter Island. That's where we'd usually direct them. But once in a while we'll get people who would say, well, I want to be scattered close to Just Van Dyke because I had a special love for the island. We've had requests for scattering in the area of Sugar Mill, for example. So in exceptional cases, some permission will be granted.
So is there any reasons why the ashes are to be scattered in a particular location as opposed to another location?
That's not clearly stated right now.
Okay.
But I think there are particular areas that were designated for that purpose.
Okay.
And with respect to scattering on land, I don't recall applications of that nature, but I think I do recall applications where people would ask for the ashes to be buried on the property. And in those cases, the minister would have to give permission.
And the land would have to be.
It's usually the person's property. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think I don't know if there's anything else to discuss about.
Well,
importation
and exportation.
Importation and exportation of bodies.
Right. Importation, we have a number of persons who die overseas, and sometimes they come here for a memorial service, or they come here to be buried. So the applications are processed by the ministry as well, and the chief medical officer has to sign off on those to verify that there is no infectious disease for importations as well as exportations. And that is part of the application process. And for importations, we process them, and we also have to notify the ports of entry that approval has been given, because immigration, customs. And I should add that we do also inform the Environmental Health Department, and to comply with the international health regulations, that before the close of this year there is going to be some amendments that are necessary to comply with the international health regulations where the Environmental Health Division is concerned. So for importation and exportations, in terms of certain standards that have to be met. So it is possible that you would have we are currently working on some legislation that would bring the country, the territory, in compliance with the international health regulations.
Does a person have to get any documentation from the country or the officials in the country where the person, I should say, what documentation that is required from the place where the person is coming from?
We'll have to get a death certificate as well. Mm-hmm. And if the person, for example, for cremation, we require a cremation certificate certifying that the person was cremated based on the standards. And I think that's basically it for the time being. But when the IHR, when we have the legislation to comply with the international health regulations, there might be some additional documentation that will become necessary.
Does the dead person have to have a passport?
Not at the moment, but it will become a part of the process with international health regulations, because the form is being amended. Our form will be amended because the legislation is being amended to comply with that.
Well, I mean, I know it.
So the passport details page would be required, yes.
Yeah, okay, because I know it sounds jokey, but the real question is whether if you have a friend who is not a Bilanger or is not a BVI lander, mm-hmm. that wants to be buried in a BVI from America, for example, mm-hmm. can you bring that person here to be buried in public land?
There's nothing stopping the person right now from being buried.
Okay. So I don't know if that's something that needs to be regulated. But it's just a thought that occurred to me.
Okay.
I have a text. How does burial at sea work? Do you actually get buried at sea in a casket, or is just the ashes that get scattered at sea?
Both.
So you could have your ashes scattered at sea, or you could get buried in a casket?
You can get the ashes scattered at sea, but also people are buried at sea. I think we had a recent burial at sea 2 weeks ago, but the exact detail, the funeral home will have to speak to those. We only deal with the processing of the application.
Okay. Now, when an application, though, in the process of giving permission to be buried at sea, mm-hmm. Is there a different specification for the casket, for example? Does the casket have to be filled, have to be a certain weight so that they could stay to the bottom? I mean, it's just things that is coming to my mind,
right,
that might be a challenge.
Yes, as far as I know, there's specific, there are some specifications for those. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if the Act specifically speaks to them, but I will look while I'm here. But I know that there are some specifications with respect to the type of casket and the weight that the funeral home has to comply with.
Okay.
Because the casket has to go to the bottom.
And are there any areas that are reserved by the government for burial at sea, or can you just select, it says 5 miles offshore at any particular location?
There is a specific area. I think it might be 5 miles south of the St. Peter Island, Norman Island area, but there's a specific area where permission is granted for burials at sea.
And you couldn't, and so it's like a sea burial ground, more or less.
In the area, beyond that particular area, meaning that you can't bury, for example, you can't go down King Gadamer Beach and bury somebody. It has to be a distance
It has to be at least 5 miles from shore, from any shore.
Yeah, it has to be a certain distance out, but it is particular areas that we designate, not over the entire territory.
Okay, that's what in a sense locate a burial ground at sea.
Right.
Yeah.
Is a particular area that is restricted to right now.
Okay. Now, is there a difference in fees for persons that want to bury at sea as opposed to bury on land?
You know, right now, there are no fees. The only fees we have right now in our legislation are the fees for burial in public burial grounds. The law speaks to adult grave, $35, child's grave, $15, and then there's a family grave for $100. But
what about importation and exportation fees? So when you bring a body in, you don't have to pay to bring it in. There's no.
We don't have any fees. We don't have any fees on our end. The fees that they will incur would be on the funeral home end, in terms of their processing fees. But in terms of the government, not any fees at the moment.
Now, some religious persons or denominations or churches and so on might have a preference. They might say, well, a Christian might say, I don't want my family member buried next to a Muslim. And a Muslim might say, I don't want my family member buried next to a Hindu or a Buddhist. Are there any special provisions for special locations for persons of different religious persuasions being buried in any particular area in any of the cemeteries?
Not at the moment, but it is a matter that the government will have to address.
You're actually considering it?
Very soon.
You have requests for this?
Requests have been made from two different groups in particular. I will allow them to remain nameless at this point. But requests have been made. So very soon the government will have to have a policy decision, and I guess within the legislation as well, because different persons from different religious denominations, religious groups have different burial. Some of them have to be buried within a specific time. Some of them have to be buried in a particular way, in that the caskets have to touch the ground. So the common practice where we build vaults that are concrete all around it will not be acceptable for certain groups. So it is something that is being discussed, and when we launched the discussion paper last year, we did ask the question of the public whether certain religious groups should be given permission, whether they should be given a special section in the public burial ground, or what are the views of people. And we have different views. Some people figure, well, the government has a public burial ground, that's it. If somebody else wants to be buried differently, then they should get their own land for that purpose. Some people feel, well, the government should respect everybody's rights, so they should designate a particular area. So those are things that we are grappling with right now. So if the public out there has an opinion on that, we would like to hear it, because we do need to send forward recommendations to the government pretty soon with respect to the way forward, because we recognize that the law is ripe for amendment. The burial ground regulations are dated 1978, Cemeteries Act 1987, and a lot has changed in the territory since then. So we know that changes need to come, but we need to hear from the public. We don't want to wait until it gets to the first reading in the House for people to start the outcry. So if they have concerns, if they have ideas, share them now.
And share them where and to whom? You
can share them with the Ministry of Health and Social Development. We are at the admin complex, or you can email Ministry of Health at gov.vg. That's the way we received some comments last year when we launched a paper. Some people send in the comments online, some people email us, some people send their comments in writing. So we will accept, if you're going to write, you write a letter to the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health. If you're going to send it by email, you send it to Ministry of Health. Or if you want to come by and visit the office and let us know what your thoughts are, it's fine as well.
Certain religious groups want to have their adherents buried 3 days, within 3 days of the death. Are you able to accommodate that presently?
Is that possible? If it's a normal death, yes. We process, our service charter says that we process burial applications within 1 to 2 days. In most cases, they're processed on the same day. And especially for our sister island, folks on the sister islands, basically ask them to hold on. And I should add here that we will be making applications possible online within the next month. Persons can apply online. We have been, thanks to the Civil Registry and Passport Office, they have been back on a new database. They have their website, they've launched their website, so we are linking to their system. So through their system we will have access to death records. So in the next couple of months, while we require death certificates and permits to bury right now, in the next couple of months, once we are fully linked, we will probably no longer require people to submit those, because we would have access to the information that we need through the Civil Registry and Passport Office. And you can apply online. You don't have to physically come to the office with effect from by mid-June.
And what about the documentation? How is that going to be processed? You're going to have that online as well, and you'll be able to access that from the registry, from the registrar's office?
We will. So basically, right now, people have to make 2 stops to us. They come to drop off the application, and then they come to collect the approval. So we make it possible for you to apply online, then you just come and collect the document. And instead of having to drop off, so if you apply online, and eventually we will probably, since they have to go to get a death certificate, we probably have to be in communication with the Civil Registry and Passport Office if there's a computer available that maybe they can use. But since they can do it now at the Passport Office, it's just downstairs and upstairs.
Well, it seems to me, and of course we're talking about going green, and we're talking about not using so much paper, because paper comes from trees, and we need the trees to give off oxygen so that we'll have air to breathe. So I'm thinking that you could get the death certificate from the registrar online. The person can apply online, make reference to the death certificate at the registrar's office, and then you can email approval back to the applicant and not have any paper at all.
That might be in the foreseeable future. But right now, I think the church needs records. The ministers would need proof. But I guess email everything.
Yeah, and
okay.
it's easy to store, because the records will be on a computer and you have easy access.
Okay.
You can call it up faster. I mean, this has got to be the way to go.
In the future, yes.
No, it can't be the future. That is no.
We have to make sure.
You already have the technology in your office to do that. No.
Right, but you have to be mindful that some of the private burial grounds, the managers and stuff, we have to make sure that everybody will have access to computer.
Everybody have a computer.
Oh, you're sure?
Several. Yes.
You're sure of that?
I'm sure of that.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure not everybody has a computer.
Yeah, but
we have some popular ones. I would think that for those persons who don't have a computer, certainly they could come to the office and go through the process. But
right.
I think computers becoming so common now.
Right.
Even if you don't have a computer, you have an iPad, or you have an iPhone. You could,
right.
You have some technology that could access.
Yeah, we will work towards that.
All right.
We at least have to eliminate some of the paperwork first before we eliminate it altogether.
Okay, we're gonna take a break for another word from our sponsors. The final break. We're gonna talk about the penalties of non-compliance, if you have any penalties, and what those will be for persons who disobey the law. And I'm hoping to hear from you on the phones, because I don't have any more questions to ask. I'm just letting you know straight up. And if Mrs. Igwe doesn't have any more information to give, we will end the show for tonight. So if you got questions, get your questions when we come back. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Spotlight is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, Tortola Concrete Limited, Gilbert's Painting Contractors, and CCT Global Communications.
Welcome back to Spotlight. Yes, we've been having a discussion. I'm here with Ms. Igwe from the Ministry of Health and Social Development, and we've been having a discussion about burials. Interesting discussion. Hope you found it useful. Numbers on the screen. Now is the opportunity to call, because soon we are going to end the program. But we want to talk about, before we go, Ms. Igwe, we want to talk about compliance, obedience to the law, and what will happen if we don't get permission to, and we don't go through the proper channels, we don't go through the process.
Okay, it is an offense if you proceed and construct a grave in a burial ground without permission. The law lists a number of offenses, but that is one of the chief ones. If you go and construct a tomb without grave without permission, that's an offense, and the penalty is a fine on summary conviction of $1,000 or 6 months in prison. That might seem small, but we need people to comply. We have had cases where people have, as a matter of fact, as recently as this week, I had a call from somebody inquiring about something that had taken place some months ago. But basically, people should not go to the burial grounds, and the law also talks about the fact that there shouldn't be any vehicles in the burial ground. Even animals should not be there. Sometimes you go to a burial ground and people actually,
the sheep and the goat in there feeding.
People have the goats and sheep feed it in the burial grounds, but that is an offense too. That should not be allowed. That should not happen. But we want people to comply. I think one of the things I really want to stress and ask people to do is to comply with the burial ground managers. Some of the burial ground managers have complained that persons do not always comply. They will give instructions and people do not comply with with the instructions. A sore point for them is the fact that we give people permission to bury, and we always include a line about please make sure that all the debris and construction materials are removed, and people, they bury and they leave, and they do not come back. They leave the sand, they leave the gravel, they leave all sorts of things there. And the burial ground managers have actually been asking for us to have a refundable deposit, in that you pay a fee, and if you do not remove, the government keeps the money, because they're going to
cost the government to take
it costs the government to have to clean the place back, because and it is really bad in a number of cases. Some people, and then also with respect to removing faded flowers from graves, the burial ground managers, in their attempt to keep the place looking clean, they would go and try to remove, and some of our people tell them all sorts of things.
Well, that's interesting, because how would you manage a situation like that? You know, people come in and bring artificial flowers to the grave, and they're going to get old and dusty and moldy and just unsightly generally.
Right.
And who is going to be responsible for cleaning that up?
The family should actually go back and look at cleaning them up. But in the burial ground managers, in their efforts to keep the place clean, they have attempted to remove some of them.
What authority are you going to give the burial ground manager? What teeth is he going to have, or is she going to have have compliance and to make some adjustments on the spot?
I think there's a need for some administrative fines, because the law currently makes provision on summary conviction. But if I can see I came into the burial ground and I saw you, I can take your photograph, I see you doing this, you should have authority to institute some administrative fines. And if there's an appeal process, let there be an appeal process. But I think by the time you wait to have a summary conviction, for some people, is it worth it?
Not only that, but it's costly to go to court and have that process and take up court time with that additional burden of having to deal with non-compliance in the case of burials in cemeteries.
Yeah, I think there's a need for administrative fines. To me, that would be the only way of strengthening the burial ground manager's powers, and because you can see if somebody's blatantly disregarding the law.
And the way now you could take a picture with your cell phone and attach it to a documentation and give it to the person and have them go to the magistrate court and pay, just like you pay a parking ticket.
Right. Just like you got a parking ticket, I need to be able to give you a notice and say you've violated section XYZ, and the penalty is you need to go and pay a fine. And if you fail to pay the fine, then we go to court. Okay?
That sounds like a sensible plan to me.
But also, I think I must really, as I talked about the fact that Civil Registry and Passport Office, we've linked with them. The hospital is also linked on their system as well right now, and we are expecting that in the coming months our services will become more efficient in the way we do things. We're hoping that we don't have people making all these stops, that you can basically, that those of us who are linked internally, that maybe we can do the communication among ourselves and to assist the customers, because some persons continue to say, I didn't realize that when it's a death you have to go through all this. So it can be a little bit, especially if it's a sudden death. I mean, death is not something that anybody's ever prepared for. So as much as possible, whatever we can do to ease the situation, I think that is our role.
Are you going to have this information on a website where a person can go and all the things that we discussed tonight, all the regulations, all the application requirements and the procedures and so on, have a website designated for that, so that you could go and get that information without having to call someone, and you could facilitate that process yourself? Eventually,
yes. The ministry's website is still to be launched, but in the meantime we are, based on the Civil Registry and Passport Office, their website, we will be able to access the applications through that.
Are you going to have more public meetings or discussions on this discussion paper and these regulations that you're planning to put into place?
I guess once we have something because we did receive comments. We received quite a number of comments last year when we launched the paper, some of which we just need to have some internal meetings to decide, okay, because some people did suggest some heavy fines and some other fees actually. So we are going to, within the ministry, we'll have an internal team that looks at the recommendations that came in and basically make a recommendation to submit to the minister on the different amendments that should be put in place to improve the current legislation.
So this draft legislation is now ready to go. We're now ready to go to cabinet, ready to go to the House of Assembly for.
Not as yet, because we're still in the discussion paper stage. So basically, what we're doing right now, we will have to now take the recommendations to cabinet, and then once cabinet approves the recommendations, then cabinet will direct the AG's office, AG's chambers to draft the amendment to the legislation, whether the amendment or a new legislation. But there are some sections, there's no need for a change to some sections, but we definitely see some sections that need to be amended because times have changed a whole lot since 1987.
Okay, any last final comment, anything that I forgot to ask, didn't know to ask, and you think that you would like to have the public know?
Just to remind the public that we do have the fees. The government is not trying to make life harder for anybody, but the legislation has been there, and we are just basically enforcing what's in the law. We've since May 1st, you know, in January we had a lot of number of deaths, so if we had started from January we would have had a good bit of change by now, but since May 1st we've only had 2 burials in public cemeteries. But still, every dollar helps because we do have a lot of expenses. We have burial ground managers that we have to pay every month. We have upgrades that we are trying to do right now. So we're just asking people to comply. don't go to the burial ground manager before you come to the ministry. Come to the ministry, pay your fees, or what has been happening too, because the funeral homes are aware of the fees will come through them. So whether maybe they will just add on $35 to their fees to take care of the processing, but the applications can also come to them since they apply as well.
So most people are just going to the funeral home, and the funeral home is taking care of the whole process.
Yeah, but some people still just come to the office because they prefer to deal with it themselves. Some people say, well, they just need to know what there is to do. But I must say that the funeral homes have stepped up to the plate in that they have added it as a service to the person. So they're the ones that will go to the registrar's office. They're the ones that will come by us to collect. But people can still do it, because I also like to tell people, you can do it. It's not a complicated process, because for some reason some people think that it is a complicated process. The form is a simple form. The people in the Ministry of Health are always willing and able to complete. We do complete the form. And you know, I should have mentioned, Mr. Smith, that you know that the tourist board has a liaison officer when it has debts for tourists and stuff. So we work very closely with Ms. Albert Wheatley with debts for tourists, and again, those are fast-tracked. So a call is made, we make the provision. So we help to make the process easier. And we do have a number of them, because we have had a number of persons that have died in the territory. We've had a number of drownings. So we do work with the tourist board closely on that as well.
Thank you for calling Spotlight. Right ahead, please. You want Spotlight? Speak, please.
Carolyn Stout Igwe.
Yes, Carolyn Stout Igwe. Go right ahead, please.
Mrs. Stout Igwe, this government in the process of acquiring several acres of land in the future with regards to the public burial ground, taking into consideration the large population.
I'm not sure if I cannot speak to any plans right now. I'm not sure what the plans are, but the point is well taken, because we know that the land is scarce. So I know that the government acquired Seacoast Bay within the past 5 years, thereabout 10, certainly under 10 years. So that is a new burial ground that has been added. But I don't know whether the government is in the process of acquiring additional land for burial ground purposes.
Okay. All right. And I think it should be said that it's not, this new legislation is not just about collecting the fees.
Right.
Certainly, we from the discussion that we've had tonight, we can see that there's a need to manage this process so that space remains available, things are done in an orderly fashion, and everybody has access to their loved ones in a memorial way after death.
Right, because the whole aspect of the marking of graves and the whole upkeep of the burial grounds is a concern, because you know, a number of times we would get calls and say, well, this burial ground is not in any good order. When it's raining, you know, I saw a burial ground, a private burial ground that was very clean a couple months ago, very clean, but now it is full of grass, because when the rain is falling, the grass goes very quickly. So it's a matter of constantly maintaining the burial grounds. But some of the persons who own private burial grounds, I remember we did a site visit going around the territory a couple of years ago, and when we told some persons, well, you know that the law requires that the burial ground should be fenced. They say, well, tell the government go fence their own first, and then you can come back to us. Or some of them will say plain out, well, the government going to send some fence to give me to fence it. But it's not a private burial grounds are private. And if you're going to, and that brings us to the next question, because some persons actually feel that there should be an ongoing process for private burial grounds. You get a trade license, it's valid for a year. The question is, should a private burial ground be licensed for 3 years? Or do you have to maintain certain standards in order to maintain your license? Those are some of the questions that people have also asked, because of the fact that some private burial grounds are overgrown.
Ms. Igwe, we actually have fallen on it during the clock.
All right.
It certainly was a pleasure having you, and I consider that the discussion was very informative, and of course we hope that persons watching were able to get the information necessary to plan their burial processes in a way that's in keeping with the law. And of course, they could always come to the office, the Ministry of Health, and make suggestions, or call on the phone to the Ministry of Health and make suggestions.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Great. Next week, the spotlight will be on the Caribbean Examination Council. Should CXCs be the only exam standard in the BVI, in the BVI's public secondary schools? Should there be a local exam? How respected internationally is the CXC? Be here for the answers to those and other questions when the spotlight shines on the CXCs next Tuesday evening. Spotlight is seen live here on JTV Channel 55 Tuesdays at 8 p.m. and we broadcast Sundays at 2:30 p.m. And of course, you can catch up with all your spotlights on jtvlive.net anytime you like. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your words of encouragement, your suggestions, your criticisms. You can email me at jtvspotlight@yahoo.com. I'm at your anchor, reminding you that when the spotlight is on, you see the facts. Peace and blessings.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Roadtown, Tortola, BVI.